Welcome back, dear friend, to Sleepy History, the place where time slows down, where the dust of the past settles softly, and where stories stretch out long enough to lull your thoughts into something gentle. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd love for you to share something with me, and with everyone listening alongside you, scattered across the world like tiny lanterns in the dark. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from, which city, which country, and what time it is there right now. It always feels strangely comforting to know that while the clock strikes midnight here, someone else is pressing play in the early morning or just before dawn or somewhere in between. And if you find peace in these stories, if they help you drift off or simply keep you company when the world feels too restless, please consider giving a like and subscribing. It's the quietest but warmest way of saying, yes, let's keep meeting here again and again. Tonight, we are not wandering through medieval plague pits or marching with Roman legions. No. Tonight, we slip into the hushed interior of a Victorian drawing room, into a world of lace curtains, heavy wallpaper, and the faint hum of gas lamps. A world where politeness ruled in public, but forgetfulness was swallowed in private. And on the table, between a jar of marmalade and a piece of toast growing cold, lies a small amber bottle with a cork top. Inside, laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, elegant as a perfume, dangerous as a shadow. So, tuck yourself in, let the night press lightly against your window, and follow me back into the 19th century, into the quiet epidemic that turned so many women into something pale, fragile, and ghost-like. By the middle of the 19th century, laudanum was not a scandal, not a secret, not even something to whisper about in corridors. It was ordinary, folded into the fabric of daily life like lace stitched into a hem, a bottle in the sewing basket, a bottle in the nightstand, another tucked discreetly behind the jar of flour in the kitchen. They were not hidden out of shame, but simply placed where they might be useful, like scissors, like pins, like sugar. For many Victorian women, the day began with a drop in the tea. Not much, just enough to make the sharp edges of the morning rounder, to make the sound of footsteps on the floorboards less irritating, to make the ache in the chest feel like something far away. By mid-morning, perhaps another sip slipped into a glass of water before sewing circle, or before receiving a guest whose company was more of a duty than a delight. At supper, a tablespoon in the claret, just enough to turn talk of drains, tariffs and coal prices into a harmless fog that could be smiled at and endured. It was not rebellion, it was not indulgence, it was maintenance, as routine as smoothing down the folds of a dress, as expected as arranging flowers on the mantel, and the bottles themselves looked so respectable. Delicate, hand-blown glass, cork stoppers wrapped in paper, labels written in graceful lettering, sometimes with gold ink, sometimes tied with velvet ribbons. They promised restoration, relief, tranquility. They promised that womanhood, with all its tight corsets and tighter expectations, could be softened with just a teaspoon. Doctors approved, husbands approved even more. One medical journal in 1868 observed with a kind of clinical satisfaction that laudanum administered to women of sensitive disposition had a most beneficial tranquilizing effect on the household. Translated, this meant, she is quieter now, she has less trouble, she is easier to bear. And so, the names multiplied. Doctor. Pickering's restorative for female frailty. Mother Bailey's quiet drops. Godfrey's cordial. Behind the poetic titles, the recipe was nearly always the same. Opium and alcohol. Sometimes with a touch of colouring, sometimes with a splash of peppermint to disguise the bitterness. Enough to calm, enough to sedate, enough to turn a lively spirit into something translucent, like a lace curtain swaying gently in a summer breeze. Letters survive, written in fine, careful handwriting, where housewives spoke almost casually about their habit. One woman in Surrey, writing in 1872, confessed, "I take my morning draught as the sun strikes the curtains. I find it improves my patience with the postman, the cat, and my own children, in that order." No one called it addiction. No one called it danger. It was simply domestic anesthesia. Legal, fashionable, comforting, and very, very hard to refuse. And yet, as the days blurred into weeks, something subtle began to shift. The teaspoon that once soothed began to feel weaker. The drops that once brought calm now barely lifted the fog. The body, though rarely spoken of, was already learning the truth, that each quiet sip drew it further in. But no one said this aloud. Confronting a lady about her laudanum use would have been unspeakably rude as discussing money or politics or ankles. So the ritual continued, silently, politely, elegantly destructive. And in the evenings, when dinner parties stretched on, when the conversation dulled into the same debates about moral hygiene and novels that were far too French, there was always one guest who could be relied upon, the small brown bottle resting in a reticule or slipped beneath the napkin. The kind of guest that never argued, never judged, never left. It always begins with a spoon in a teacup, but soon the spoon finds other duties. Because once laudanum was accepted in the morning tea, it was only a small step to imagine it elsewhere. In a pudding, perhaps, or in a custard, or folded delicately into the batter of a seed cake. Victorian cookbooks did not print the recipe. You will not find a line in Mrs. Beeton's Household Management that says, add 2 teaspoons of opium to soothe the nerves. But the whispers were there, in the margins, in the family notes, in the quiet exchange of tips between sisters and aunts, who knew that a Sunday tart could carry more than currants. A few drops in the dessert, for digestion of course, for nerves, for better sleep after a heavy roast. A tablespoon stirred into wine, not for indulgence but for health. And so, slowly, the dinner table itself became a kind of stage, where the food was polite but the atmosphere was softly unhinged. Imagine the scene. You are seated in your finest silk gown. The roast beef is undercooked. Your aunt has cornered the magistrate about moral decay. Someone has brought a quivering gelatin salad that looks possessed. The conversation turns to politics, drains, tariffs. Your smile tightens. And then, with the grace of a duchess on the verge of fainting, you reach for your own secret companion, the amber bottle waiting discreetly in your purse. You pour a few drops into the claret, then a few more, just enough to soften the edges of reality, until your husband's voice fades into a fog, until the beef no longer matters, until even the gelatin feels less offensive. By the time dessert arrives, you are floating 6 inches above your chair, nodding along to a poem being recited by a child across the table, while mistaking the candlestick for your late cousin Harold. And nobody bats an eye, because a lady with slightly glossy eyes and impeccable posture was not considered intoxicated. She was considered refined, delicately managing her nerves. By the 1850s, this had become almost an art form. Laudanum found its way into biscuits, trifles, even ice creams. Medical journals noticed somewhat uneasily that soothing syrups were creeping into recipes. Housewives noticed something else, that guests were far more tolerable when served a pudding laced with chemical calm. One particularly sharp-tongued woman from Lancashire wrote to a local paper in 1859, "Brandy alone leaves the mouth dry, but brandy with laudanum makes the pudding less dull, and the guests much more tolerable." And so, the dining room filled with silences that were not silences at all, but gentle fogs, drifting across porcelain plates and crystal glasses. Children recited poems to half-attentive aunts. Husbands lectured on drains to wives who were hovering quietly above their own bodies. A dinner that might have ended in tension, tears, or slammed doors ended instead in a haze of nodding smiles and slightly trembling hands. Of course, there was a cost. Tolerance grew. The drizzle became a pour. The teaspoon became a tablespoon. What began as seasoning became the main course, and eventually, though no one admitted it aloud, the boundary between calm and collapse blurred entirely. But in that moment, at the dinner table, with the jelly shaking and the wine poured, the effect felt heavenly. The conversation softened, the room glowed, and for a little while everyone was drifting together, like ghosts rehearsing their lines at a banquet. Morning arrives again, though it does not feel like morning. The sunlight is pale, not golden, and it falls across the room like an unwanted guest. Your eyes open, but the rest of you resists. Your thoughts are wrapped in wool. Your body feels as though it has been gently pressed flat by something heavy and invisible. The air smells faintly of stale perfume and of a candle that burned too late. You sit up slowly, the corset digging into your ribs as if to remind you that even breathing is a discipline. Somewhere, the maid is moving through the house with the soft patience of someone who knows too much. You rub your temples, and in that blur of waking, you are faced with a troubling thought. Did you already take your morning dose? You're not sure. You think you did. But then again, the curtains seem to sigh at you in a way that feels suspicious. Perhaps you didn't. Perhaps you should take another, just in case. And so you do. Just a few drops to steady the nerves, to ease the flutter in the chest, to smooth the sharp corners of reality. It helps for a moment. But then doubt returns. Maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe one more for symmetry. 3 is such a comforting number, and besides, Queen Victoria liked 3s. By the time breakfast is laid out, you are already teetering between clarity and fog. The toast is in front of you, spread with marmalade, but it feels like a stage prop, like a piece of scenery from a play you no longer understand. You spread the butter as though conducting delicate surgery during an earthquake. The knife wobbles, the toast crumbles, and you find yourself speaking softly to the marmalade jar, as though it were an old confidant. This is how it begins. Not with scandal, not with collapse, but with a kind of cottony blur, a forgetting, a doubling, a quiet slide into dependence masked as routine. The doctors notice in their way. They see women with dilated pupils and trembling hands. They observe the faint sway in the gait, the complaints of sleeplessness, the constant whispers of nerves and fatigue. But they do not confront. To suggest addiction would be unthinkable, almost insulting. Instead, they write in their journals of female agitation or delicate constitutions, and they prescribe, of course, more laudanum. And so the cycle deepens. The bottle rattles in its drawer a little more quickly, empties a little sooner, is replaced a little more urgently. Yet in public, everything remains serene. A composed face, a steady smile, a faint pallor that society praises as refinement. But behind the lace curtains, in the silence of breakfast, the truth is whispering, that the calm now requires more effort, that the peace no longer comes cheaply, that the lady of the house is already drifting somewhere she cannot quite return from. The morning dose, once a luxury, has become a necessity, and with necessity comes something harder to ignore. The shadow of dependency, growing quietly, like ivy across the wallpaper. It is easy at first to believe that nothing has changed. The bottle is still there, the cork still soft, the drops still fall into the tea with their familiar music. And yet, somewhere beneath the calm surface, the body has begun to bargain. What once was enough is no longer enough. What once soothed now merely delays. And then comes the day, or the night, when the bottle is empty, and the apothecary has not yet been visited. That is when the shadow shows its teeth. The room, usually so steady, begins to tilt. The wallpaper patterns stretch and twist, as though the ivy vines want to crawl into the room and wrap around your wrists. The grandfather clock in the hall ticks louder than it ever has, each chime a reprimand. Your hands shake, not delicately, but with the persistence of something buried deep in the nerves. You try to embroider, but the needle refuses to obey. It dances in your fingers like a sword in a child's hand. You attempt to read, but the letters slip and wriggle across the page, rearranging themselves into nonsense. You lie down to rest, but sleep will not come. Instead, there are sweats, cold and sharp, soaking the lace of your nightgown. And then, of course, there are the voices. Not loud, not clear, but murmurs in the corner. The sound of a portrait whispering, the faint chant of the fire grate, the sensation that even the furniture disapproves. Doctors do not call it withdrawal, they call it female agitation. They suggest rest, perhaps a stay in the countryside, perhaps another tonic. And the tonic inevitably is more laudanum. The cure is the cause. The circle completes itself. Letters survive, written in hand so shaky that the ink splattered like raindrops. One woman confessed. At first it quieted my nerves. Now it merely keeps me from clawing at the curtains. Another wrote in secret, "I fear I shall tear the skin from my bones if the tremors persist. They would call me mad if I spoke, so I choose silence and another spoonful." And yet, In parlours and drawing rooms, none of this is spoken. To name it would be vulgar. To admit it would be to accuse society itself of error. And so the women smile faintly, even as their lips tremble, even as their hands shake against the porcelain cups, even as they become, drop by drop, something less alive, less present, more spectral. They are not called addicts. They are called delicate. They are not said to suffer. They are said to drift. And in that drifting they begin to resemble exactly what society wished them to be. Quiet, pale, obedient, ghosts in bonnets. It begins innocently, as most things do. An afternoon of baking, flour dusted across the table, a cat wandering dangerously close to the mixing bowl, the air carrying the faint smell of nutmeg and warm butter. The house is quiet, and you, like so many Victorian women, are expected to fill the hours with something wholesome, something domestic, something that can be displayed proudly when guests arrive. But baking is dull, repetitive. Flour, eggs, sugar, the same careful stirring. And in that dullness the mind begins to wander, until it drifts toward the bottle sitting nearby, the same one that sweetens the mornings and softens the evenings. What harm could it do, you wonder, to add just a few drops into the dough? Not for indulgence, for health, for calm, for steadier nerves. A teaspoon becomes a tablespoon. The batter grows dark, fragrant, oddly alive. You taste it with the tip of a spoon, and it whispers back to you, earthy and floral, as though despair itself has been soaked in honey. When the biscuits come out of the oven, golden and delicate, they carry not only warmth, but a quiet, chemical silence. This is how the Victorian household invented its own kind of edible. Biscuits that soothed, seed cakes that hushed, tarts that promised patience. No official recipe, no printed instructions, but plenty of family secrets written in the margins of cookbooks, passed down like heirlooms. Add a little for digestion, add a little more for grief. A letter survives from 1873, written by a weary housewife to a women's journal. I find that a few restorative drops folded into my seed cake bring calm to my constitution, and fewer complaints from the children. A polite way of saying, the biscuits make everyone quiet, and I, at last, can feel like a ghost instead of a servant. Soon it became routine. A mid-morning biscuit for the nerves, a tart at luncheon for digestion, a cake before supper to prepare the spirit for conversation and corset rage. Guests smile politely, never quite noticing that their drowsiness was baked into the crust. Children fell silent after a slice of pudding. Husbands dozed in their chairs, thinking it was the port that lulled them, never suspecting the dessert. Medical journals began to notice, cautiously. The British Medical Journal in 1877 observed, in words as dry as the ink that carried them, many women of respectable standing consume morphine in what they describe as light baking. Light baking, of course, being Victorian code for I am full of muffins and denial. And so, kitchens became quiet laboratories of oblivion. Rolling pins tapped against dough like gentle hammers of forgetfulness. Ovens exhaled with the patience of a confessor. Plates filled with sweets that did not only feed the body but silenced it, one crumb at a time. It seemed harmless. It even seemed elegant. But beneath the sugar and spice, dependence thickened until even the taste of cake became inseparable from the taste of laudanum. At first the kitchen seemed enough. A teaspoon in the tea, a spoonful in the pudding, a slice of cake that carried with it not only sweetness but a hush that blanketed the nerves. But as days stretched into months, the body began its quiet rebellion. What once was soothing now seemed thin. What once dissolved sorrow now merely delayed it. And so, inevitably the next step was taken, not toward the sewing basket or the pantry shelf, but toward the doctor's office. Imagine the room. Heavy curtains, paisley carpet, walls lined with books bound in brown leather, though most of them unopened. The air smells faintly of ink, tobacco, and something sharper. The chemical tang of bottles kept in drawers. You sit in a velvet chair, posture perfect, voice trembling just enough to appear both fragile and respectable. The doctor listens with the expression of a man who has already heard your story a dozen times today. You speak of sleepless nights. of palpitations in the chest, of a gloom that presses like a fog against the ribs. You call it nerves, because that is the only name society has given you for the hunger inside. He nods gravely, as though he has uncovered a mystery, though he knows exactly how this conversation will end. At last, with a gesture that feels almost theatrical, he opens a drawer. Inside, dozens of small bottles gleam faintly in the half-light. Labels written in curling script, elixir for delicate women. Drops for nervous agitation, restorative syrup for the melancholic constitution. He selects one, places it in your hand as though bestowing a blessing, and tells you to take it as needed. He does not say what it contains, you do not ask. It is laudanum, of course. Sometimes morphine. Sometimes a combination of both, wrapped in a sweetness that hides the bitterness. To the doctor, you are now under care. To your husband, you are improving. To the household, you are quieter, paler, easier to manage, and so the bottles multiply. From the apothecary, from the physician, from the discreet delivery boy who knows not to ask questions, they slip into handbags, into desk drawers, into the folds of embroidered handkerchiefs, each one promising calm, each one promising rest, each one making the body softer, slower, emptier. The medical journals praised it still. One physician wrote in 1878, "In certain delicate cases, opium may succeed where conversation fails." Translated, if she cannot stop weeping, give her enough to silence the tears. And so, behind closed doors, women became both patients and customers, treated not with listening, but with sedation. Their sighs were mistaken for improvement. Their pale stillness was praised as refinement. Their dependence was camouflaged as grace. It did not feel like addiction, it felt like being cared for, and that perhaps was the cruelest deception of all. There is a strange quiet in the house tonight, not the ordinary kind of quiet broken by footsteps on the stairs or the faint tick of a clock, but a deeper silence, one that feels almost holy, almost suspicious. It drifts down the hallway, through the heavy curtains and pools in front of the nursery door. Inside, the baby is sleeping, not stirring, not crying, not fussing, just still, perfectly still, as though the air itself is holding its breath. You lean against the door frame, exhausted, your nightdress clinging damply from the day's sweats, your hair pinned in a loose and desperate knot. You whisper to yourself that this peace is a blessing. You whisper that it is proof you are a good mother. On the dresser sits the bottle, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. The label promises calm, relief, angelic obedience. It does not say what is inside morphine, enough to hush a toddler into silence, enough to carry an infant into a stillness that lingers far too long. And yet, in parlours across Britain, this syrup was trusted as if it were a nurse in a bottle, a teaspoon for teething, another for colic, another for a cough that would not stop. Overworked mothers with no help and no reprieve found salvation in the amber liquid. Husbands praised the quiet. Midwives approved. Neighbours nodded, and the children slept. Sometimes they slept too long. By the 1860s, whispers began to circulate in medical journals. Doctors noting infants who did not wake, children whose silence was not the silence of peace, but the silence of death. Yet even then, the warnings were soft, hesitant, drowned out by advertisements in newspapers that promised mothers an easier life, a quieter night, a household finally at rest. Imagine the scene, a mother sitting in her rocking chair, finally breathing without the constant cries, the child swaddled and silent, skin pale as moonlight, the house calm, the woman staring at the bottle, half relieved, half terrified, whispering perhaps just one drop too many. And so, while parlours filled with women sipping laudanum in tea, nurseries filled with infants lulled into silence by syrups. Addiction did not begin in adulthood. In some houses, it began in the cradle. This was not cruelty, not intentional harm. It was exhaustion dressed as love, desperation wrapped in calligraphy and cork. It was a society that offered mothers no rest but the kind poured from a bottle. And so the silence spread, from the drawing room to the nursery, from wives to daughters, from mothers to infants, a generational hush that carried forward like a lullaby no one wanted to sing, but everyone knew by heart. Not every bottle was hidden in a sewing basket. Not every sip was taken furtively, with the curtains drawn and the maid sworn to silence. For some women, women of title, of wealth, of velvet drawing rooms, laudanum was not a secret at all. It was a fashion. Picture the scene. A chandelier humming faintly above, velvet curtains drowning the windows in crimson folds, a room heavy with perfume and whispered laughter. Ladies recline on fainting couches, their gowns flowing like rivers of silk, their fingers loosely curled around crystal goblets. Inside those goblets, not wine, not sherry, but laudanum poured like a fine cordial, its dark liquid gleaming in candlelight. Here, addiction was reframed as refinement. A pale complexion, trembling hands, half-lidded eyes that stared dreamily at nothing. These were not signs of sickness, but signs of taste. To move slowly, to sigh often, to seem ethereal and absent. It was almost artistic, almost poetic. Writers fed the illusion. Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, published decades earlier, had wrapped laudanum in the glamour of visions, of dreams, of creativity. To be touched by opium was to be touched by inspiration, or so the story went. And so, in salons and parlours, women raised their glasses and toasted not only to health and beauty, but to the strange, drifting state that blurred them into ghosts. One hostess was said to serve Petit's fours dosed with tinctures, assuring her guests they would hear music more sweetly afterward. Another swore laudanum made her better at the piano, though she could barely keep her fingers steady on the keys. A duchess laughed once, confessing she had named all her bottles after Shakespearean heroines, Desdemona, Ophelia, Juliet, as though each sip were a role to play. And so, the gatherings continued, candlelit rooms filled with pale women who floated through conversations as if underwater, their laughter soft, their words slow, their presence more like mist than flesh. No one called them addicts. They were muses, they were refined, they were, in the cruelest irony, celebrated for fading. But the bottle does not care for status. Whether tucked in a servant's cupboard or raised in a duchess's goblet, the effect was the same. A slow drifting away, a dimming of the self. The wealthy simply had better curtains, better glassware, better excuses. And yet, in those salons with the chandeliers glittering and the fire glowing, there was always a moment, a pause between laughter, a silence between sighs, when someone's eyes stared too long at the bottle, and the truth shivered faintly in the air, that elegance and ruin were drinking from the same glass. By the 1870s, the bottle emptied faster than it once did. A teaspoon in the morning, a tablespoon at supper, another poured discreetly into the claret. It was never quite enough anymore. And so the women, graceful and trembling, developed a new kind of art, the art of visiting many apothecaries, and never the same one too often. Picture it. The cobblestones of London slick with fog, the sound of wheels from passing carriages, the faint smell of coal smoke hanging in the air. You step into the narrow shop of an apothecary. The shelves are lined with glass jars, powders, tonics, dried herbs that no one buys anymore. The shopkeeper looks up, and you tilt your head just so, placing one gloved hand against your temple. Your voice trembles. You speak of sleepless nights, of agitation, of a husband's sighs that feel like thunder in your bones. You are delicate, you say. You are afflicted. You are in need of relief. And the bottle is given without hesitation, but you cannot return tomorrow. That would be unseemly, suspicious. So you rotate. Monday at the shop with the blue awning. Wednesday at the shop near the church. Friday at the one by the market, where the boy behind the counter never meets your eyes. Each time, a new story. Each time, a new name. One week you are Mrs. Arbuthnot, tormented by nerves. Another you are Miss Fenwick, crushed by grief. By Friday, you might even be Lady Godwin, recovering from the trauma of reading a French novel. It is theatre, delicate and precise. A faint sigh here, a trembling wrist there, a touch of the lace handkerchief to the eye, as though tears are waiting. The apothecaries know, of course. They always know. But as long as the coin is real and the story polite, the bottle changes hands. Some women even mapped their routes like generals planning a campaign. 6 shops in a fortnight without raising suspicion, as long as the bonnets were changed and the gloves switched. A letter printed in a domestic magazine in 1874 advised, almost cheerfully, "I find that with proper spacing, one may visit 6 dispensaries without alarm, though I do recommend changing one's voice slightly between outings." It was survival, elegant and desperate, because dependence cannot be reasoned with, cannot be delayed by shame or by propriety. When the nerves begin to tremble, when the mind begins to claw at itself, there must be a bottle. And so the apothecary circuit became as regular as church bells, as necessary as air. And in the fog of the city, the women drifted from shop to shop like shadows, polite, perfumed, ghost-like, carrying home in their gloved hands the only cure society ever allowed them. At first, you fetch it yourself. The walk to the apothecary is a ritual, the stories rehearsed, the gloves carefully chosen. But as the weeks pass, the trembling grows worse, the corset feels heavier, the stairs steeper. And one morning, as the bottle rattles empty in your drawer, you realize you cannot face the journey. So you call for the maid. She is 17, perhaps 18, paid in pennies and board, her hands rough from polishing brass and scrubbing linens. She has been trained to be invisible, to lower her eyes, to move like a shadow through the house. And now you press a coin into her palm, slip her a folded note and tell her to go. Not to the shop with the green awning, of course. The man there knows too much. But to the one on the corner, the one with the blue sign. Her eyes widen for a moment. She knows what you are asking. She knows what the note contains. But she curtsies, obedient, and disappears into the fog. When she returns, the bottle is placed on your tray beside the toast. She says nothing. You say nothing. But the silence between you has changed. She knows now. She knows your secret. And from that day, the household is no longer untouched. The maid makes the trips. The footman is told to look the other way when parcels arrive. The cook hides bottles in the flour bin. The butler, polite as ever, begins to keep a careful count, though he never dares mention it. Some servants felt pity. Others felt disgust. Most felt fear. For to refuse was to risk dismissal, and to obey was to become an accomplice. In one surviving diary, a lady's maid in 1876 wrote, "Each Thursday, I'm sent to fetch her draft." The chemist gives a look, but says nothing. I place the bottle near her brush and leave the room quickly. I do not wish to see her eyes after she drinks. The house itself became part of the habit, curtains drawn not for fashion but to hide trembling. Meals delayed because the mistress could not rise until the drops had steadied her hands. Bells rung in the night for bottles to be brought from the locked drawer, a silence growing heavier than the ticking of clocks. And in that silence, an invisible balance shifted. The mistress, who once commanded the house, now relied on it, on the obedience of those who served her, on their willingness to carry her burden, to keep her secret, to protect her reputation from the gossip that could ruin her. The servants knew, and she knew they knew, and that knowledge bound them tighter than any contract of employment. Addiction had moved beyond the woman herself. It had seeped into the household, into the relationships, into the spaces between master and servant, and in that silence the house became a cage, not locked from without, but from within, sealed by the cork of an amber bottle. When the house could no longer bear it, when the servants whispered too much, when the husband noticed the bottles vanishing too quickly, when the trembling hands and pale silences became impossible to disguise, there was always one final solution: send her away, not to prison, not to scandal, not to shame, but to a place with a gentler name, a rest home, a retreat for delicate women, a cure for exhaustion. The carriage ride is quiet. You sit inside, wrapped in a travelling cloak, clutching a monogrammed bag. The maid has been left behind, the curtains of the carriage drawn. Outside, hedges and fields pass in a blur of green and grey. Inside, you are silent, too weak to protest, too tired to ask. At last, you arrive. A grand stone house set back from the road, surrounded by gardens cut into shapes of flowers and crosses. A nurse greets you, dressed in crisp white, her smile polite but empty. You are shown to a room with lace curtains, a rocking chair, a bed pressed tightly with white linen. On the nightstand, a bottle. You are told to rest, to sleep, to worry no more. But rest in this place means sedation. Sleep means more laudanum. Worry no more means silence at any cost. The records from such homes speak plainly. Nearly 40% of their patients already used laudanum before admission. Nearly all were given it daily while inside. Doctors described them as calmer, more manageable, more docile. Their improvement was measured not in health, but in how still they became. One woman, writing shakily to her sister in 1887, confessed, "They say I am better. I sleep more than I wake. I have not felt my hands in a week. They tell me this is good." Some of these retreats were beautiful, country estates with manicured gardens, music rooms, embroidery circles. Others were bleak, little more than padded rooms and long corridors of locked doors. But whether elegant or severe, the purpose was the same: containment. Husbands visited occasionally, bringing flowers and books. Children wrote letters that were read aloud, then folded away. Servants whispered at home that Madame was taking the air. And society, ever polite, nodded and moved on. Behind the curtains, though, a quieter truth unfolded. Women whose lives had narrowed to the space between a bed and a bottle. Women who stared at wallpaper until the flowers shifted and breathed. Women who rocked silently in chairs while the hours dissolved like sugar in hot water. They were not healed. They were not freed. They were simply stilled. And in that stillness, society congratulated itself for finding a way to turn suffering into silence and silence into grace. The bottle did not vanish when the carriage door closed. It lingered in the house like a scent, like a whisper that clung to the drapes. Even as women were sent away to country retreats and private asylums, their daughters remained at home, watching, listening, learning. Children always notice. They notice the mornings when their mother does not rise. They notice the way her hands tremble as she lifts a spoon, the way her voice drifts and slurs in bedtime stories. They notice the empty bottles tucked into sewing baskets, the strange silences that fill the house when she disappears into her room. They may not have the word for it, but they understand absence, and absence, repeated daily, becomes inheritance. Some daughters grew up to mimic the ritual. When their own nerves fluttered, when grief pressed heavy on their ribs, when the world demanded too much silence from them, they reached for the same cure: a drop in tea, a sip before supper, a bottle in the drawer. What had been their mother's secret became their own. Others turned rigid in the opposite direction. They swore they would never touch a tonic, never taste a syrup, never lean on anything but discipline and prayer. They rejected bottles, but they still carried the shadow, the knowledge that comfort might be poured, that pain might be numbed, that womanhood itself was expected to suffer silently. Medical journals of the 1880s spoke in cautious language of inherited tendencies to melancholia. But what they were really describing was this: a cycle of silence passed from one generation to the next, like a ghostly heirloom. There are fragments of letters, diaries, little notes tucked between cookbooks and hymnals. A granddaughter once wrote, "I have kept my grandmother's teacups but thrown away her bottles. I hope that counts as progress." It did not always end in tragedy. Some women broke free, some found ways to bury the bottles in the garden, to choose clarity over fog, but many more did not. And so the habit lived on, not with scandal, not with noise, but with the faint sigh of lace brushing against a nightstand, the soft clink of a cork against glass, the quiet fading of yet another woman into the ghost society had asked her to be. By the end of the century, the epidemic did not end with scandal or shouting. There was no trial, no great parliamentary debate, no sweeping moral panic. It simply faded the way fog fades when the sun rises, slowly, reluctantly, leaving dampness clinging to the ground. The bottles grew harder to buy. Regulations tightened, doctors hesitated, pharmacies shifted toward newer medicines. By the 1920s, laudanum's reign was over, but the silence it had created lingered, pressed into diaries left unfinished, into families that never spoke of what they had seen, into the ghosts that move quietly through the halls of memory. There was never a monument for these women, no statue raised, no plaque inscribed. History remembered generals, kings, inventors, not the pale women who sat in parlours, slowly dissolving into lace and laudanum. And yet, their absence is its own memorial. The gap in the family stories. The line in a will leaving behind porcelain teacups, but no explanation for the trembling hands that once held them. Sometimes, though, there was rebellion. A daughter who buried the bottles in the garden. A mother who whispered warnings to her child. A granddaughter who kept only the teacups, writing that perhaps progress was nothing more than choosing clarity over fog. And so, the legacy of laudanum is not only sorrow, it is also survival. For every woman who drifted into ghostliness, another found the strength somehow to wake, to step outside, to breathe unsoftened air and decide that feeling, even pain, was better than silence. Tonight, we have walked with them, through breakfast tables where marmalade jars listened patiently, through dinner parties softened into dream-like banquets, through nurseries where syrups hushed infants into dangerous stillness, through salons where pale women toasted with crystal glasses of oblivion, through apothecaries and velvet retreats, and finally into gardens where bottles were buried beneath the earth. And maybe, if you listen closely now, you can hear them still. The faintest sigh in the wallpaper, the softest rustle of skirts in the corridor, the lingering perfume of laudanum in a forgotten drawer. Not quite gone, not quite here, ghosts of the Victorian age. And now, dear friend, it is time for rest. Let the curtains close softly. Let the fire fade to embers. Let the story dissolve like sugar in tea. If you are still awake, congratulations. You have travelled through another strange, gentle corner of history. And if you are already drifting, may your dreams be lighter than theirs, your sleep more honest, your night more whole. Until tomorrow, good night. Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian Britain, a place where the air was thick with soot, morals were surprisingly loose, and just about everyone was on something. Tonight is all about the pharmaceutical buffet that kept Victorian society spinning. Before you drift off, do me a small favour and tap the like button and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, flip on a fan for that gentle background hum, and tuck yourself under the sheets. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how Victorians coped with stress before self-care meant 10 streaming services and a $45 scented candle? What did people do when their teeth hurt, their nerves were frayed, or they just wanted to escape the horror of another family dinner? Was everyone really sipping morphine and calling it a tonic? Could you walk into a pharmacy and walk out with a bottle of cocaine toothache drops, no questions asked? Was Grandma high, or just pretending to enjoy her boiled cabbage again? And most importantly, would you survive a day in Victorian Britain without accidentally overdosing on something that sounded like a Hogwarts ingredient list? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1857 London. Your head hurts, your neighbour's ferret is coughing again, and your local chemist greets you by name. Good luck. Laudanum, the opiated cup of tea. Victorian mornings begin with a generous splash of laudanum, a glorious blend of opium and alcohol dropped into tea, baby bottles, and sometimes the family soup. Doctors prescribe it for coughs, headaches, existential dread, and mild inconveniences. You take your first sip, and suddenly your worries about the rent and the cholera outbreak feel delightfully far away. It's the original Don't Care Ola tonic. Let's set the scene. It's breakfast at your cramped London townhouse. The gas lamp flickers, the wallpaper is peeling, and the neighbours are already arguing about whose turn it is to shovel horse droppings off the stoop. On the table, a crust of stale bread, a cup of black tea, and a tiny brown bottle with a label that basically says, "Why not? Laudanum, the miracle medicine. It's 10% opium, 90% Victorian optimism, and it tastes like regret soaked in cherry. You reach for it without thinking, the way you'd reach for coffee today. Only this is coffee that would make you forget you're even late for work. A few drops in your tea and the world blurs at the edges. Your screaming toddler is blissfully snoozing thanks to a few drops slipped into his milk. The cat's yowling. Laudanum probably works on animals too, but you're not quite ready to share your secret stash with Whiskers just yet. Victorian doctors love laudanum. They prescribe it for nearly everything: toothaches, insomnia, menstrual cramps, wounded pride, female troubles, boredom, and of course the infamous nervous complaint. Your neighbour, Mrs. Parker, swears it helped her bunions. Your uncle used it for gout. Your Aunt Edna takes it for delicate nerves, which, as far as you can tell, means she's tired of living with Uncle Alfred. Even your local poet claims laudanum is the secret to writing 5 sad sonnets before breakfast. In the mid-19th century, before the Pharmacy Act of 1868, opium was sold freely at grocers, and laudanum was a common part of household life. But laudanum is more than just a quick fix, it's a lifestyle. You find yourself calculating how many errands you can run before it wears off. The answer? None. But you try anyway. Your walking pace slows, your worries melt, and even the foul River Thames seems picturesque in the hazy morning light. You could almost forget the city's constant noise, the clang of distant factories, and the haunting bell of the nearby undertaker, already wheeling away another victim of Victorian living. Let's talk side effects, because the Victorians sure didn't. Sure, you're not in pain anymore. In fact, you can't really feel anything below your chin. Time becomes slippery. You spend the afternoon reading the same paragraph in your Penny Dreadful, and wonder why the villain never gets any closer to finishing his evil plot. Later, you decide to get some fresh air, only to realise you've been staring out the same window for 3 hours, hypnotised by a pigeon with commitment issues. The real risk isn't immediate, of course, after all. Laudanum is completely legal and sold over the counter at every respectable chemist and corner grocer. No prescription needed, just a few coins and a friendly smile. Addiction? That's just another word for regular customer. If you start feeling jumpy, anxious, or your vision takes on the sepia tone of an old photograph, you just add another dash to your tea. Problem solved. Still, there's something almost comforting about this daily ritual. Life in Victorian Britain is relentless. Smog, debt, unwashed socks, unsolicited advice from distant relatives. Laudanum doesn't fix anything, but it makes everything feel possible. You might even write a letter to the editor about reform, or finally tackle that mountain of laundry. More likely, you'll take another nap and dream about a world with slightly less horse manure, and so the bottle sits on the mantel right next to the family Bible, the only 2 things guaranteed to bring comfort. As the day fades into a foggy evening, you pour one last dose and toast to Victorian resilience, the art of carrying on one dreamy, opiated cup at a time. Opium dens, the socialising Victorian style. Step into a smoke-filled East End cellar, where the air is thick enough to chew and dreams leak through the floorboards. Here, you stretch out on a battered sofa and share a pipe with strangers, drifting into a blissful haze as your wallet quietly disappears. It's socialising, Victorian style. Say little, drool a lot. Let's take you there. Your shoes are sticking to the floor. You duck through a battered wooden door, the street noise swallowed by heavy curtains. Instantly your nose twitches at a fug of incense, lamp oil, and something that might be weak, old cabbage. Or perhaps it's just someone's coat. The ceiling is low, the wallpaper peeling, and every surface is a mosaic of stains and colours that defy the natural spectrum. Congratulations. You're in an authentic Victorian opium den, a cross between a living room and a chemistry experiment gone wrong. The regulars ignore you, or at least try to. Most are somewhere between awake and astral projection. You weave past a pair of gentlemen who might be bankers, philosophers, or just really lost. There's a painter sprawled in the corner, humming to himself and sketching the same 3 lines on a crumpled napkin. Every table has a mismatched teacup, filled with something murky, and at least one dozing patron who's forgotten their own name. You flop down on a patched velvet sofa, the kind that would probably qualify as an archaeological find if it ever saw daylight. Someone passes you a long pipe, ornate, delicate, and sticky. The ritual begins. You heat a sliver of opium over a candle, inhale slowly, and wait for the world to slip its moorings. The first breath is sharp and bitter, but soon the taste disappears behind a tidal wave of numbness. A soft, warm fog settles into your bones. Every sound becomes a gentle echo, every worry floats away, and even your itchy socks no longer bother you. Conversation is optional and usually impossible. Victorian etiquette evaporates here. Nobody's comparing family pedigrees or debating the correct angle for a calling card. Instead, you share a companionable silence, broken only by the clink of glass, the hiss of matches, and the occasional poetic mumble. Your mind wanders. Maybe you remember a childhood pet, or the fact that you meant to pay your rent yesterday. Doesn't matter now. The world outside feels about as real as a novel you once read and forgot to finish. Time is elastic in the den. An hour drips by, or maybe it's 3. Occasionally, someone rouses enough to stagger out. Shoes missing, hat on backwards, eyes the colour of rainwater. The proprietor, a silent shadow with the stamina of a caffeinated bat, moves through the gloom, collecting coins, replenishing pipes, and making sure nobody accidentally sets themselves on fire. A good den keeper knows how to keep things just legal enough to avoid the police, but just shady enough to attract the poets. You watch as the line between dream and reality bends. Some patrons chase visions, gorgeous colours swirling in the gaslight, phantom music playing from nowhere. Others simply nap, faces slack and peaceful, achieving the elusive Victorian goal of rest without responsibility. It's cheaper than a holiday, and if you ignore the risk of arrest, theft, or a truly legendary hangover, almost as restorative. Let's be clear. Opium dens are not glamorous. You're lying on a questionable sofa next to a stranger snoring in Morse code. The air is so thick you can bite it, and the risk of tuberculosis is only slightly lower than the risk of being bored to death by a philosophy student on his 3rd pipe. But for a few hours, you float. The misery of the factory, the nagging of the landlord, the bleak British drizzle, all fade out to static. When you finally stagger outside, the city is quieter, the world softer, and your wallet lighter. You vow never to return. You'll be back tomorrow. Victorian self-care. Dream big, drool quietly, and always check your pockets. The all-purpose cure, cocaine. Forget flossing. You just dab a little cocaine on your gums, and suddenly you can't feel your face, let alone your dental pain. Victorians also used it for shyness, exhaustion, or to prepare for a really long, awkward dinner with the in-laws. Honestly, why brush when you can numb? Welcome to the medical marvel of the late Victorian age, over-the-counter cocaine, the original all-in-one solution for everything from dental emergencies to social anxiety, and, because it's Victorian England, also for anything described as female nerves, melancholia, or the persistent feeling that your hat is too tight. You pop by your local chemist, ask for something for your toothache, and walk out with a tiny glass vial and an enthusiastic recommendation. It's the 1890s, and everybody's feeling just a little bit more energetic than usual. Dentists absolutely adore this stuff. You walk in with a cavity the size of a shilling, and leave floating on a cloud of chemically induced indifference. The dentist smears cocaine on your gums, your lip goes numb, and suddenly dentistry isn't so bad after all. No anesthesia, no Novocaine, just pure pharmaceutical-grade confidence. Your dentist might even send you home with a sample so you can keep the good times rolling in the comfort of your own parlour. And it doesn't stop at toothaches. Are you feeling awkward at your cousin's engagement party? Cocaine. Got the mid-afternoon yawns after a morning spent dodging manure carts and judgmental glances from your neighbour? Cocaine. Want to impress your boss at the office with tireless work and alarming punctuality? There's a bottle for that. Victorian advertisements promise that cocaine will banish all sensation of fatigue, cheer the melancholic, and restore vigour to the most listless of spirits. Is it a wonder potion or just really, really good marketing? Yes. You might be wondering, what about side effects? Victorians are too, but mostly in the sense that they're excited to try new ones. Tingling, delightful, a sudden urge to clean the entire house at 2 a.m. Highly productive, the inability to stop talking about your ideas for inventing a self-ironing cravat. Finally, the family listens. And when the effects wear off, no problem. Just dab on a little more right before your next social engagement, or after, or both. Cocaine isn't just for the home crowd either. It's the darling of Victorian explorers, mountain climbers, and anyone unfortunate enough to be alive before the invention of reliable coffee. Sir Ranulph Fiennes probably never climbed Everest, but if he had, he would have packed a hearty supply. Victorian hikers chew cocaine-laced lozenges to brave the chilly winds of the Scottish Highlands and to forget, temporarily, that their boots are 80% holes. Even the Queen's physicians are in on the act. Her Majesty's special tonic contains a suspiciously invigorating blend of wine and coca leaves. It's prescribed for everything from delicate nerves to the persistent existential horror of living in an age where the average life expectancy is basically one bad winter. The most famous cocaine wine, Vin Mariani, was endorsed by popes and presidents alike, with one dose containing as much as 50 milligrams of pure cocaine. You take a sip, and suddenly it's much easier to ignore the coal smoke, the rats in the walls, and the fact that the family dog is still using the sitting room rug as his personal bathroom. If you're a little anxious, socially awkward, or simply tired of the Victorian grind, cocaine is the great equalizer. No longer must you suffer in silence through small talk or contemplate running away from your own dinner party. A discreet pinch on the gums and you're transformed, cheerful, chatty, and ever so slightly unstoppable. Your problems melt away, your gums go numb, and for a brief moment you're convinced you could give a speech in Parliament, or at least survive another game of charades. In the end, maybe cocaine doesn't solve your problems, but it sure makes you forget you had them. Your mouth is numb, your nerves are soothed, and your sense of Victorian decorum is temporarily out the window. Dentistry will never be the same. Sleep well, and remember, some smiles are best left numb. Chloral hydrate, the sleep that's too good to be true. Sleep doesn't come easy when you live above a busy street full of horses, hawkers, and 3 a.m. accordion concerts. Enter chloral hydrate, a new miracle sedative. Just one spoonful, and you drift off to sleep, possibly until the next coronation. Let's get comfortable. You've spent the day inhaling coal smoke, your hair smells like fried fish, and the neighbours in flat 2B are arguing about whose turn it is to empty the chamber pot. It's midnight, the oil lamp flickers, and the only thing more persistent than your anxiety is the sound of carriage wheels scraping cobblestones outside your window. You toss, you turn, you count sheep, until you remember that in Victorian England sheep mostly count you, but tonight you have a secret weapon. Chloral hydrate, bottled hope fresh from the apothecary. The label reads, for sleeplessness, nerves, and general agitation, which, if you're honest, is your entire personality after sunset. You pour a spoonful into a glass, swirl it with whatever's left of the cherry, and offer a silent thanks to the enterprising chemist who decided the human brain could be fixed with a clever molecule and a strong enough placebo effect. The taste is, well, chemical. Slightly sweet, faintly medicinal, like drinking the ghost of a cough syrup that's seen too much. But the effect is pure magic. In a few minutes, your eyelids grow heavy. The relentless tick-tock of the mantel clock slows to a gentle lull, and even the persistent smell of boiled cabbage from downstairs can't keep you awake. The city's noise blurs into a distant, soothing hum. The horses fade to a memory, the accordion mutates into a lullaby, and even the upstairs neighbour, who seems to take up midnight furniture rearranging as a competitive sport, becomes nothing but a shadow in a dream. Victorian doctors are thrilled with chloral hydrate. It's the first truly reliable sedative, a sleep aid without the poetic messiness of laudanum or the criminal undertones of opium dens. Chloral hydrate is modern, respectable, and not at all the sort of thing that might cause you to wake up in a different century. Prescribed for nervous disorders, insomnia, and occasionally for simply being too alive, it quickly finds a home on every bedside table, from Mayfair mansions to soot-stained boarding houses. Everyone has a story. Your friend Margaret takes it so she can sleep through her husband's enthusiastic snoring. Your brother-in-law uses it before big meetings with his boss, claiming that the secret to confidence is 8 uninterrupted hours of chemically assisted slumber. Even the family dog gets a taste, just a little mixed into his gravy to stop him from howling at the full moon and the constable's hat. Let's talk side effects. Yes, you wake up groggy. Sometimes you can't quite remember what you dreamt, or if you actually dreamt at all. There's a faint sense that your brain has been wrapped in a velvet blanket. Soft, but also slightly suffocating. Some mornings you linger in a pleasant fog, not quite sure if you're awake, asleep, or just existing in a third state reserved for Victorians and overtired modern commuters. But really, who's complaining? The ability to sleep through an entire parade, 3 domestic arguments, and a surprise visit from your aunt, who loves nothing more than 5 a.m. storytelling, is a blessing you don't take lightly. Besides, if you oversleep and miss work, you can always blame the fog, or the cat, or Victorian medicine in general. Chloral hydrate is not just a drug, it's a declaration. I will sleep, and nothing, certainly not the racket outside nor the existential terror of industrial Britain, will stop me. If you drift off and miss the next royal wedding, well, it's probably for the best. So one last yawn, one last spoonful. Sleep tight, insomniac. History is full of restless nights, but tonight, you're not one of them. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, nap time for the wee ones. Teething pains, restless baby? Just give the child a few drops of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, an over-the-counter concoction loaded with morphine. Victorian parents swear by it. Victorian children don't because they're asleep. You wonder why the kids are so quiet at dinner? Mystery solved. Let's picture it. Your household is a tornado of cranky toddlers, creaking floorboards, and the distant sound of a neighbour's cat expressing its opinions on moonlight. You've tried everything. Lullabies, gentle rocking, scolding, promising your offspring a pony if they'll just close their eyes. But Victorian parenting is not for the faint of heart, and at a certain point, every mother reaches for the same little glass bottle in the medicine chest, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It's the original sleep mode, long before tablets and Gentle Rain soundtracks. The label promises miracles, relief from teething, colic, hiccups, mysterious Victorian illnesses like the vapours, and, if you read between the lines, general child-related chaos. 1 teaspoon and your child is transformed from wailing banshee to angelic cherub. It's not magic, it's morphine. And, in Victorian Britain, that's basically the same thing. Administering the syrup is a ritual. You measure out a careful spoonful, ignoring the very scientific just eyeball it method. The smell is faintly sweet, herbal, and tinged with the ineffable scent of quiet. Within minutes, your tiny human's eyelids grow heavy, the whimpering subsides, and the house is blessedly, gloriously peaceful for the first time all week. You can hear yourself think. You can also hear the sound of every other mother on the street breathing a collective sigh of relief. Let's not sugarcoat it. Victorian parenting is a marathon without snacks. There are no disposable nappies, no child-proof locks, no parenting books except the Bible, and, if you're lucky, a dog-eared copy of Mrs. Beeton's. A fussy child at night means the whole household is awake. Siblings, grandparents, the lodger you forgot was living in the attic. With 1 dose of soothing syrup, the baby drifts off, and you finally have a chance to address the other pressing issues of Victorian life, like scrubbing coal dust off the curtains or hiding from your landlord. Doctors adore Mrs. Winslow's. Pharmacists recommend it. Grandmothers pass down secret tips about how to make the effect last through the Sunday sermon. The recipe, a mix of morphine, alcohol, and gentle Victorian denial, quickly becomes the go-to for every family with a restless little one. The syrup is marketed as harmless and entirely safe, which in Victorian language means nobody's asked too many questions yet. There's even an entire advertising campaign featuring happy, rosy-cheeked babies and angelic mothers looking far more rested than reality allows. Posters boast that Mrs. Winslow's quietly soothes and relieves the bowels. No mention of what happens if you accidentally double dose, but that's a worry for another century. For now, the only thing you care about is sleep. Glorious sleep. Side effects? Well, they're mostly ignored. Children are quieter, sleepier, less likely to get into the coal scuttle. Some seem so soothed they barely wake for breakfast. But in a time before child psychology, or even regular hand-washing, peace and quiet trump minor concerns like consciousness. And so, bedtime in the Victorian era becomes a remarkably peaceful affair. The baby snoozes, the parents collapse into chairs, and the air is filled with a sense of accomplishment and the faint, ever-present aroma of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. You pat yourself on the back, close your eyes, and, for just a little while, pretend you've got it all figured out. Sleep well, little one. The Victorian night is long, the walls are thin, but at least tonight, thanks to Mrs. Winslow, everyone is getting some rest. Ether parties, a little chemical giggling. Nothing says, let's have fun, like passing around a soaked handkerchief at a garden party. Whether you're a surgeon, a student, or just bored at a dance, ether brings people together in a haze of confusion and giggles. Let's set the scene. You're attending a respectable Victorian soiree, the kind where the punch is tepid, the dancing is enthusiastic but slightly off rhythm, and your neighbour insists on retelling the same story about his cousin's railway accident. It's a long evening ahead, but fortunately your hostess has a secret weapon stashed in the conservatory, a delicate glass bottle of ether. Officially it's for medical emergencies. Unofficially it's the most exciting thing to happen since last year's hedgehog race. Soon someone produces a lacy handkerchief and discreetly dabs it with ether, holding it up with a conspiratorial wink. You're not sure what to expect. Maybe a little dizziness, a little lightheadedness, a brief escape from the endless poker. Instead you inhale, and suddenly the walls go fuzzy, your knees wobble, and everything is hilarious. The flowers in the centerpiece are whispering secrets. Your aunt's laugh sounds like a kettle whistling underwater, and the hostess's hat appears to be floating slightly above her head. You collapse gracefully onto a fainting couch, giggling with a group of new best friends, none of whose names you will remember by morning. Ether isn't just a parlour game for the bored upper classes, it's a medical marvel too. Victorian surgeons sing its praises. Before ether, surgery was a desperate race against pain, held down by 4 strong assistants and a bottle of gin. You'd be lucky to survive the operation and the hangover. Now, with ether, the patient drifts off to a peaceful nothingness, blissfully unaware as doctors do their best to improve whatever's wrong with you. Victorian style, of course. That doesn't mean surgery is safe. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still a good chance you'll wake up missing an extra limb, but at least you didn't scream the wallpaper off the walls. Surgeons are delighted, patients are groggy, everybody wins. Ether becomes the go-to for tooth extractions, amputations, and, if you're a particularly nervous bride, occasionally even wedding nights. Students and medical apprentices quickly catch on to ether's more recreational possibilities. Chemistry class becomes a lot more interesting when the laboratory assistants are chasing each other around with bottles of the stuff, dissolving in fits of laughter at jokes about potassium. University parties evolve. Instead of sherry and tedious conversation, there's a round of who can hold their breath the longest before giggling uncontrollably. If you lose, you faint. If you win, you also faint, but with style. Ether is, in some ways, the great social equalizer. Rich or poor, anxious or exuberant, everyone agrees on one thing. Life's worries seem a lot smaller with a nose full of volatile chemicals. Stressed about the coming industrial revolution? Ether. Sick of the cousin who plays the accordion at midnight? Ether. Curious about the world beyond the garden hedge but too shy to ask? You guessed it. Are there drawbacks? Of course. The aftermath is less glamorous. You might wake up on the grass with your hat on backwards or discover you've confessed your undying love to the family spaniel. Occasionally the party ends with someone fainting dramatically into the shrubbery or a guest attempting to waltz with the grandfather clock. The neighbours talk, but honestly they're jealous they weren't invited. But for a brief, intoxicating spell, ether turns the humdrum Victorian evening into something approaching joy. You return to reality with a smile, slightly dizzy, certain that, if only for a moment, everything was light, silly, and full of possibility. Ether, because sometimes history's greatest medical breakthrough is also the life of the party. Gin, the poor man's philosopher. Before there were trendy cocktails, there was gin, cheap, powerful, and everywhere. You drink it to forget your troubles, and then drink more to forget you drank it. By morning, the hangover is legendary, and the solution is more gin. Let's paint the picture. It's a chilly evening in Victorian London, the kind where the fog seeps into your bones and every street lamp glows like an accusation. Your job is uncertain, your rent's overdue, and your neighbour has just been promoted to local character by virtue of yelling at pigeons for 3 hours straight. What do? You wander down a narrow alley, dodging puddles of mysterious origin, and find yourself at the entrance to a gin shop, a haven for the worn, the weary, and the absolutely done with this century. Inside, the light is dim, The air is thick with laughter, complaints, and a general miasma of disappointment. The bartender gives you a look that says, "Join the club," then sloshes a generous measure of gin into a chipped glass. It burns on the way down, but you can almost feel it working, like a tiny squad of liquid optimists marching through your veins, promising you that tomorrow will probably not be worse. Probably. Gin is everywhere. Mothers drink it to steady their nerves. Fathers drink it to forget their jobs, or lack thereof. Kids might not drink it, but they definitely know the smell. Sharp, herbal, like a pine forest set on fire and extinguished in regret. It's called Mother's Ruin, and if that sounds dramatic, you haven't met a Victorian mother 3 gins deep. The government tries to intervene, but the people just switch to new recipes, new back-alley stills, new ways to turn potatoes, grains, or leftover sadness into something drinkable. You notice that nobody sips gin here. There are no delicate garnishes, no umbrella-topped cocktails, just mugs and throats in the immediate pursuit of numbness. You down another round. Conversation loosens, laughter rises, and for a brief, shining moment, you forget that your boots are wet and your prospects are drier than the gin itself. The gin shop is a study in Victorian sociology. There's a banker crying in the corner about his lost investments, a pair of chimney sweeps arm wrestling for half a pie, and an old woman quietly humming "God Save the Queen" as she lines up her empty glasses with military precision. You make a friend, a shoemaker who swears he once cobbled for the Prime Minister. He can't remember which Prime Minister, but the story gets better with each refill. Of course, the real problem is the morning after. You wake up in a room that might be yours, surrounded by the detritus of bad decisions, a broken hat, an unfamiliar dog, and a note on your hand that reads, "Never trust a man with 2 umbrellas." Your head feels like a construction site, your mouth like a gravel pit, and your stomach is auditioning for a role in a Greek tragedy. The Victorian solution? More gin. The hair of the dog is less a metaphor, more a way of life. You stumble back to the shop, clutching your head, and order another round. The cycle continues, unbroken, until either payday or a sudden burst of moral reform. Occasionally, you vow to stop. Sometimes you even succeed, for an hour or 2. Still, there's something honest about it. Gin is the drink of the people, the poor man's philosopher, the consolation prize for surviving another day in a city that never really goes to sleep. It's liquid courage, liquid regret, and liquid proof that the Victorians were, above all, stubbornly optimistic. Or maybe just stubborn. So tonight, raise a glass to your ancestors. They survived the gin epidemic, which saw Londoners drinking an estimated 2.2 gallons of gin per person per year in the 1740s, and so, miraculously, did the human race. Sleep well, and maybe stick to tea tomorrow. Patent medicines. A tonic for what ails thee. Victorian streets are bursting with colourful bottles promising to cure what ails you. Some contain cocaine, others contain alcohol, and some, if you're unlucky, contain mercury. You buy a bottle for your melancholy and wind up with a new rash and a cheerful attitude. Let's take a stroll down the high street. Boots clacking on cobbles, purse in hand, your body riddled with aches, pains, and at least 3 kinds of mystery fatigue. Your first stop isn't the doctor, it's the chemist's shop, a Victorian wonderland of dubious science and even more dubious ethics. Shelves are lined with patent medicines in every hue, gleaming in the gaslight, labels screaming promises like "invigorates the liver" or "restores lost manliness." You pick one up, Doctor. Bicknell's Invincible Elixir, and wonder if it will finally cure your Sunday morning dread, or just make you see through time. Shopping for medicine in Victorian Britain is less like a health intervention, and more like participating in a strange lottery. No prescription needed, just a willingness to gamble with your own internal organs. Most patent medicines are a cheerful blend of sugar syrup, questionable extracts, and enough alcohol to qualify as breakfast. Some are loaded with opiates, which guarantees at least temporary relief. Others promise a quick and thorough cleansing of the system, which is Victorian for stay close to a chamber pot. Reading the label is its own adventure. Ingredients are listed with the kind of optimism only a 19th century copywriter could muster. A dash of strychnine, a pinch of calamine, and just enough chloroform to keep you guessing. For all you know, botanical essence could be code for whatever the apprentice swept off the floor. The more outrageous the claim, the better it sells. Did your hair fall out? There's a tonic for that. Are you feeling blue? Try Doctor, Periwinkle's Joyful Dew, which tastes like licorice and somehow also like despair. Every respectable household keeps a few bottles on hand. One for headaches, one for digestive trouble, one for the nerves, and a mystery bottle you inherited from your aunt that glows slightly in the dark. Children get a spoonful for coughs, women for female troubles, and men for absolutely anything that might interfere with sitting still for 5 minutes. If you're really lucky, you might find one that doesn't taste like regret marinated in turpentine. Patent medicines are the original multi-level marketing scheme. They're advertised everywhere. Posters on every lamppost, testimonials in the penny papers, travelling salesmen who promise the moon and deliver mild hallucinations. Your favourite testimonial comes from a gentleman in Leeds who claims Doctor. Wormwood's restorative cordial cured his gout, sciatica, and fear of Mondays, all in one bottle. And let's not forget the secret ingredient, hope. Even when you know deep down that Reverend Splendid's marvellous drops are 80% gin and 20% broken promises, you still take a swig and believe for a few moments that tomorrow might be slightly less Victorian than today. Of course, there are side effects. This is Victorian medicine after all. Maybe your hands tingle, your vision blurs, or you develop a rash in a location best left undescribed. You don't tell anyone. It's probably just the humours acting up. And if your patent medicine doesn't fix your problem, no worries. The chemist will happily sell you another bottle with a different label and exactly the same ingredients. By the end of the week, your bathroom shelf is a rainbow of remedies, none of which actually cure you, but all of which make life slightly more bearable. You can't help but admire the creativity of the age. Patent medicines are part miracle, part con, and part community theatre. So you take another sip, toast your reflection, and try not to think too hard about what's swirling in the glass. In Victorian Britain, sometimes the best cure is simply believing you've taken one. Sleep tight, and maybe put the glowing bottle back in the cupboard, just in case. The great equalizer, chloroform. Dentists love it, surgeons adore it, and if you're unlucky enough to faint in public, you might wake up to the gentle scent of chloroform on a hanky. Victorians use it for pain, sleep, and the occasional impromptu kidnapping. Let's set the scene. It's another bustling day in Victorian Britain, and you're minding your own business when a toothache strikes with all the subtlety of a steam train. In a world without Novocaine, you head to the dentist, though dentist here means a man with steady hands, questionable hygiene, and a surprisingly upbeat attitude. The solution? Chloroform. The latest miracle in pain relief, and if you're not careful, mild existential out-of-body experiences. The ritual is simple. You're asked to recline in the world's lumpiest chair while the dentist produces a crisp white handkerchief and a small brown bottle. He pours a few drops of clear liquid, gives you a look of grim encouragement, and presses the cloth over your nose and mouth. You inhale, feeling a cool, sweet numbness drift up from your toes to your scalp. The world blurs, sounds grow distant, and suddenly you're dreaming about winning the derby on a horse made entirely of marshmallows. Surgery, too, is transformed. Where once the operating theatre was a place of howling, writhing, and general Victorian melodrama, now it's oddly peaceful. Surgeons adore chloroform. It turns their patients from shrieking banshees into compliant lumps, free to be poked, prodded, and improved upon without the inconvenience of struggling or legal complaints. The medical journals fill with breathless reports. Appendix removed, no screaming. Leg amputated, patient dreamed of Paris. Even the most anxious patient, which, let's be honest, is everyone, can now look forward to surgery with something like calm, or at least mild curiosity. Chloroform soon escapes the operating room and finds its way into daily life. Feeling restless at night? One whiff and you're off to dreamland. Your mother-in-law visiting for the week? A little dab on her pillow might encourage tranquility. You didn't hear it from me. Victorians begin to treat chloroform like a miracle cure for life's general inconveniences. Noisy children, overlong sermons, and that annoying friend who always wants to discuss philosophy at dinner. There are even rumours of society parties, where the entertainment involves passing a chloroform-dampened scarf around the room and seeing who can stay awake the longest. Of course there are downsides. For one, dosing is an art, not a science. Too little, and you're wide awake with a damp face. Too much, and you might not wake up for the rest of the century. Some people get so enthusiastic that they wake up in a completely different city, usually missing a shoe and with no memory of the previous 48 hours. But in true Victorian style, these are seen less as risks and more as excellent stories for the next family dinner. And then there are the kidnappings, the stuff of penny dreadfuls and urban legend. If you faint on a crowded street, there's a small but non-zero chance that a mysterious stranger will produce a chloroform-soaked rag and spirit you away, Victorian damsel in distress style. More often, though, it's just the local doctor making sure you don't wake up before he's finished removing your tonsils, appendix, or, if you're unlucky, your dignity. Despite it all, chloroform remains the darling of the Victorian medicine cabinet. It is at heart a shortcut to oblivion, blissful, dreamless, and, if all goes well, mercifully brief. The pain is gone, the noise fades, and for a little while life's sharpest edges are rounded off. So, as you settle in for the night, be grateful for modern anesthetics, and maybe sleep with one eye open just in case anyone comes near you with a suspiciously floral handkerchief. Sleep well, and may your dreams be blissfully free of Victorian dentistry, surgery, and accidental adventures in chloroform. Hark, noble listeners, and welcome, or should I say, greetings, gentlefolk of the digital realm, from this humble corner of what was once Wallachia, a land where even our mountains have seen a peculiar sort of high. Gather round, draw close to your glowing screens, for tonight we shall embark upon a most peculiar journey. Forget your worries of plagues and poor harvest for a moment, and let us delve into the truly bewildering question: what in the name of all that is holy, and occasionally quite unholy, was it like to get high in the tumultuous, often terrifying, but always fascinating times of the Middle Ages? All right, picture this. You've had a day. Your lords just raised taxes again. The Black Death is probably knocking on your neighbour's door, and your teeth feel like they're staging a revolt. Perhaps the local witch just gave your cow a suspicious look, or your beloved pig mysteriously developed a limp after she walked by. You just want to escape, right? Kick back, maybe watch some TikToks of dancing peasants, whatever your weary soul desires. But here's the kicker. It's the 14th century. No Netflix, no comfy couch, no craft beer, let alone a cannabis dispensary delivering to your hovel, whether you're in the muddy fields of England or the forested hills of Transylvania. So, how did our medieval ancestors get their chill on? Or, more accurately, how did they trip balls in a world where modern medicine was basically leeches and a prayer, and superstition often trumped science, often with terrifyingly psychedelic results? Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, prepare for a wild ride that might make you think twice about complaining about your Wi-Fi signal. And if you're a returning member of our historical fellowship, you know the drill. Before we plunge into the delightfully disturbing world of medieval mind alteration, do me a solid. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and for this one, I actually recommend dimming the lights. Get cozy. Maybe grab a cup of, well, anything not suspicious looking. Because what we're about to explore is less Netflix and chill and more noxious fumes and thrill. Settle in, because we're going on an expedition into the hazy, hallucinatory history of medieval highs. And believe me, it gets weird. The apothecary, your gateway to potential, madness and medieval misadventure. You, a weary peasant, stumble into the local apothecary. It's not a welcoming sight. Forget quaint little shops with soothing teas and carefully arranged essential oils designed for your holistic well-being. Oh no, this is more akin to a forgotten corner of a mad alchemist's lab, mixed with the back room of a very unsanitary butcher shop, and perhaps a dash of a taxidermist's dusty workshop. The very air here is thick with a cloying, almost suffocating scent, a sickly sweet perfume desperately trying and failing to mask the underlying stench of decay, unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and something vaguely metallic, like old blood and rust. Cobwebs hang like forgotten dreams, thick and grey, coated in a fine dust of what exactly? Ground-up beetles? Dried newt eyes? Perhaps the shed skin of a particularly robust serpent, or the pulverized bones of a stray dog. You try not to breathe too deeply, lest you accidentally inhale a spore that turns you into a talking mushroom with an existential crisis, or worse, gives you a mysterious fever that only a perilous pilgrimage to a distant, barely authenticated relic can cure. This wasn't your friendly neighborhood CVS, folks. This was where you went for your myriad ailments, from the mundane rash to the mysterious, falling sickness. It was also the go-to for your questionable love potions, your curses for troublesome neighbours who graze their sheep on your land, and, if you knew the right whispers, your ticket to a different reality, a fleeting escape from the relentless grimness of medieval life. The apothecary himself, or herself, for cunning women often filled this role, was a figure of both respect and suspicion. Often a monk with access to ancient texts and cultivated herb gardens, a barber surgeon with more enthusiasm for bleeding than understanding of anatomy, or a travelling charlatan with a captivating spiel and a suitcase full of questionable powders, they held the keys to nature's more unconventional remedies. And trust me, they weren't always aiming for a pleasant buzz. Their goal was often cure or kill with very little in between, and a healthy dose of "we'll see what God wills." Precision dosing was a foreign concept, much like universal literacy or indoor plumbing. It was more about intuition, tradition, and perhaps a bit of prayer. Imagine the conversation, delivered in hushed tones, perhaps through a grimy curtain that barely conceals the shelves lined with bizarre concoctions. "Good morrow, purveyor of potions. I seek solace from the torment of my existence. My back aches from the ceaseless ploughing. My spirit is low after last week's famine, and the bishop fined me for humming too loudly during Mass, claiming it was a demonic incantation." And they'd squint at you from the shadows, perhaps their eyes clouded by fumes or a lifetime of dubious concoctions, then perhaps hand you a small, grimy pouch filled with suspicious dried leaves and twigs and say, in a gravelly, knowing voice, "For you, my friend, a draught to make the demons dance, or perhaps simply to make you stop feeling anything at all." And you just have to trust them. After all, what else were you going to do? Complain to HR about the lack of safety regulations? Write a scathing Yelp review that no one could read? No, you take your questionable package, offer your few precious coins, and hope for the best. Sometimes that meant hoping to simply wake up in your own bed, perhaps with a slightly lighter purse and a very upset stomach. Other times it meant hoping to wake up as someone else entirely, perhaps a prosperous merchant or a noble lady, free from the stench and toil, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, a place described only in whispered legends. The very act of entering such a place was a gamble, a step into the unknown, where the line between healing and hexing, between divine intervention and diabolical trickery, was as thin as a cobweb, and often crossed with alarming ease. You were putting your body, your mind, and potentially your immortal soul into the hands of someone whose understanding of medicine was often based on ancient superstitions and the unpredictable power of nature. The botanical bad trips, a perilous perambulation through the Garden of Madness. Our first real stop on this express train to Crazy Town, the kind of journey you definitely don't want to book again, is the sinisterly beautiful Deadly Nightshade, or Atropa Belladonna. Doesn't that name just roll off the tongue, hinting at gothic romance and forbidden desires, like something out of a medieval romance novel where everyone dies dramatically? Sounds romantic, right? Like a tragic heroine in a medieval ballad, beautiful but lethal? Wrong. This unassuming beauty, with its dark, gleaming berries that resemble tiny jewels and lush green leaves, was packing some serious psychoactive punch, derived from potent alkaloids like atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine. These compounds act as anticholinergics, blocking certain neurotransmitters in the brain, leading to a profound disruption of normal mental function. A few berries ingested, a leaf chewed, or even merely touching the plant and then rubbing your eyes, and you're looking at a cascade of horrifying symptoms: a rapid, pounding heartbeat that feels like a war drum in your chest, pupils dilated to saucers allowing too much light in, blurred vision so severe you might as well be blind, intense and vivid hallucinations, extreme delirium, and even violent convulsions. You're not just seeing things, you are the things. You might see shimmering castles in the clouds made of spun sugar and starlight, or legions of mischievous imps meticulously dancing the jig on your ceiling, perhaps even attempting to draw your family crest with mud on your hovel walls, all while chanting nonsensical rhymes that echo in your skull. More likely, you're experiencing vivid, terrifying nightmares while fully awake, consumed by a profound sense of paranoia and disorientation. You might be convinced you're naked, running screaming through a muddy field, perhaps babbling about demonic pacts and celestial prophecies, and utterly convinced you're a badger on a spiritual quest to unearth the meaning of life, which, let's be honest, would probably be just as confusing and depressing in medieval times as it is today. Fun times, if fun means a terrifying psychosis that might end in cardiac arrest, or being dragged to the village square and burned at the stake for witchcraft after being found muttering obscenities to farm animals. And remember, there's no immediate care here, no emergency room or toxicology unit. If you start barking at the moon, foaming at the mouth, or speaking in tongues in a language no one understands, which is probably just gibberish, but who's to say for sure when dealing with the devil's influence? They might just decide you're possessed by a particularly unruly demon and call for an immediate exorcism, which frankly might be more unpleasant than the high itself, depending on your priest's enthusiasm for torment and his proficiency with holy water, blessed relics and painful incantations. Your delirium might even be interpreted as confirmation of demonic possession, sealing your unfortunate fate. Then there's henbane, or Hyoscyamus niger. This unassuming little plant, often found unceremoniously growing in ditches and waste grounds, was a real overachiever in the world of medieval mind alteration. It contains similar tropane alkaloids to belladonna, though often in different proportions, leading to a slightly varied but no less harrowing experience. It was frequently used as a crude sleeping aid, because who needs peaceful sleep when you can hallucinate demons, or better yet, engage in lively debates with talking turnips about the merits of crop rotation, right? But it could also give you a delightful sensation of flying, or, profound paralysis, intense dizziness, a sensation of profound weightlessness, as if your very soul was detaching from your body and floating up to the thatched roof, perhaps to commune with the spiders and the forgotten ancestors. It was a common ingredient in medieval anesthetics, though anesthetic might be a generous term here. It was more of a delirium-inducing sedative. Imagine being operated on for a broken bone or a festering wound, perhaps a particularly nasty splinter that turned septic and required amputation, while experiencing vivid, terrifying dreams and being completely unable to move or speak, trapped within your own mind as a crude, rusty saw approaches your limb, or a cauterizing iron glows red hot, its heat radiating towards you. A medieval panic attack on steroids, folks, with a distinct possibility of dying from shock, infection, or sheer terror, long before the hallucinatory part even became a primary concern. The line between being healed and being eternally traumatized or outright killed was incredibly fine, a tightrope walked by both the patient and the healer, where the margin for error was non-existent. And let's not forget the granddaddy of them all, the infamous mandrake root, Mandragora officinarum. This plant held almost mythical status, whispered about in hushed tones in taverns and market squares, a legend born from its uncanny resemblance to a human figure. Shaped vaguely like a human, with forking roots that truly did resemble little bodies, complete with rudimentary limbs, it was rumoured to scream when pulled from the ground, a sound that would supposedly kill you on the spot or drive you mad with terror. So, first challenge, harvest it without instantly dying. Legend had it you'd tie a starving dog to it, and the dog's desperate struggle and death scream would be the one to release the root's grip on the earth, allowing you to collect it safely, albeit with a dead dog on your conscience. Morbid, utterly horrifying, and deeply unethical by modern standards, but practical, I suppose. If you had a surplus of dogs you didn't mind sacrificing for your esoteric botanical needs and believed in such omens. If you managed to acquire this mythical root, perhaps from a shady dealer at the village fair who claimed to have a death-proof method involving earplugs made of raven feathers and a very large sacred shovel, You'd then get a potent hallucinogen that causes intense visions, a profound feeling of unreality, and a complete loss of touch with your rather grim reality. Mandrake, like belladonna and henbane, contains tropane alkaloids, leading to similar anticholinergic effects, but often with a more profound sense of disorientation and dissociation. Imagine, you ingest this stuff, perhaps brewed into a tea that tastes like bitter earth and ancient secrets, or mixed into a paste for external application, and suddenly your scrawny, flea-bitten pig looks like it's wearing a tiny crown and eloquently lecturing you on the philosophical implications of feudalism and the impending doom of the potato famine, which, of course, was still centuries away. But why let facts get in the way of a good hallucination when your mind is actively constructing new realities? Or the village idiot, usually only capable of grunting and occasionally stealing chickens, starts reciting entire passages of Shakespeare in perfect iambic pentameter, despite Shakespeare not being born for another 2 centuries, leaving you utterly baffled as to whether you're mad, he's a prophet, or you've simply stumbled into a temporal anomaly. Or, far more likely and far less amusing, you're convinced the rats in your straw bed are actually tiny, malevolent demons gnawing on your immortal soul, their eyes glinting in the darkness, and your neighbour's mangy cat, usually just interested in scratching itself and shedding fur, is a witch's familiar spying on your every move, reporting back to its dark mistress about your unholy thoughts. Good luck explaining that to the priest when you finally come down from your metaphysical journey. He's already got his holy water, his book of exorcisms, and a very uncomfortable iron collar ready, just for you, and a surprisingly judgmental look on his face that clearly implies you deserved whatever demonic visions you experienced for dabbling in such forbidden remedies. The witch's brews and flying ointments, the gross and the gooey journey into nocturnal flight. But it wasn't just about munching on random plants, hoping for the best, or worst. Oh no, the medieval mind was far more creative, and frankly, a lot more disturbing. Enter the infamous flying ointments. Yes, those things witches supposedly rubbed on themselves before soaring through the night sky on broomsticks to join their dark Sabbaths, or maybe just to avoid the muddy, disease-ridden streets and the disapproving glares of their neighbours. The very idea sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it? The imagery of cackling hags anointing themselves under the pale moonlight is deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness, a potent mix of fear and forbidden fantasy. But for many, especially the outcast and the desperate, it wasn't about malevolence. It was a desperate, primal attempt to escape the drudgery, the pain, and the unyielding realities of their impoverished lives, to transcend the earthly and touch the ethereal, or at least believe they did. You're cold, you're damp, you're probably hungry, and you want to transcend this miserable existence, if only for an hour or two. Perhaps you've heard whispers of old women in the woods, or solitary figures on the edge of the village, who know how to unlock the secrets of the night, how to commune with unseen forces, how to slip the bonds of the physical world. So, with trepidation, you cautiously approach the local wise woman, or as the church might call her, the suspected witch, the very mention of whom could get you dragged before the local lord, or worse, burned at the stake. She eyes you shrewdly, her gaze piercing, her face lined with the wisdom of plants and perhaps a touch of madness. Then she hands you a small earthenware pot of greenish-black goo. The smell is indescribable. It's like rotten eggs mixed with old socks that have seen better centuries, stale breath, a hint of desperation, and perhaps a dash of bat guano or toad secretions for good measure. A truly pungent bouquet of dread and ancient, dangerous herbal knowledge, a scent that seems to cling to your very soul. You hesitate, your stomach churning, your rational mind screaming in protest. But your craving for escape overrides your gag reflex and your innate sense of self-preservation. You hesitantly rub it on your skin, perhaps on your armpits, your temples, or, as some notorious texts from later witch trials suggest, on more intimate areas, which supposedly enhance the flying sensation by allowing more direct absorption into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system's protective barriers. Immediately, a burning sensation spreads across your skin, then a chilling cold, then a profound numbness, a creeping detachment from your physical form. You feel light, unburdened, as if gravity itself is loosening its grip. The concoction often contained a terrifying cocktail of ingredients: belladonna, henbane, datura, also known as Jimson weed or thornapple, another potent hallucinogen causing intense delirium and visions, aconite, or monkshood, deadly in even small doses, leading to cardiac arrest and respiratory failure, yet somehow believed to contribute to the flying sensation, and terrifyingly, animal fat. Yes, animal fat, rendered down from pigs, goats, or even sometimes human cadavers, though this was more rumour than common practice, thankfully, a sensationalist detail added by accusers, made the mixture absorbable through the skin, allowing for a transdermal delivery of these potent alkaloids directly into your bloodstream with unpredictable speed and intensity, because nothing says magical journey like a bit of rendered pig grease, or, if you believed the sensationalist propaganda of the witch hunters and torturers, the fat of an unbaptized child, though that's more in the realm of fear-mongering and less actual recipe, thankfully. But it paints a grim picture of the anxieties and dark beliefs of the age. Now, were they actually flying? Highly unlikely unless you count a vivid, profound hallucination of being airborne as flying. More likely, they were experiencing extreme delirium, a distorted body image. The sensation of shrinking or elongating limbs was common, a truly unsettling experience, and a terrifying sense of falling or floating uncontrollably, perhaps spinning wildly through a perceived void or tumbling endlessly through the stars. Imagine the psychological terror of feeling your body lift and spin, to be utterly unable to control it, hurtling through an imagined landscape of devils or angels. Imagine waking up hours later, perhaps disoriented and bruised in a muddy ditch by the forest's edge, covered in this foul-smelling grease, your clothes askew, perhaps a few teeth missing from grinding your jaw, with an inexplicable craving for acorns and a profound conviction that you just had a rendezvous with a goblin king who demanded you dance the jig, or perhaps signed a demonic contract in your own blood, or perhaps even consorted with succubi and incubi, their ghostly forms lingering in your memory. The hangover would be brutal, a pounding headache combined with profound nausea, extreme disorientation, and a lingering sense of unreality that blurred the lines between dream and waking. The shame, eternal, if you were even coherent enough to feel it. And the villagers, well, they'd probably already spotted you muttering to yourself in the field, half naked, covered in foul-smelling goop, and decided you were definitely in league with the devil, or at least a very messy drunk who had a disturbing encounter with a badger and lost a bet. Good luck explaining that to the local priest and his zealous inquisitors. They'd have the ducking stool and the kindling ready for you by sunset, and a crowd eager for entertainment and reassurance that divine order was being upheld. These ointments illustrate a fascinating point. The perceived experience was so powerful, so real, that it fueled centuries of folklore and belief in witchcraft. It wasn't just stories. People genuinely believed they had flown, transformed into animals, communed with spirits, or attended otherworldly gatherings. Their bodies and minds, under the influence of these potent, dangerous compounds, truly told them they had. The hallucinations were so vivid and immersive that they became indistinguishable from reality, cementing beliefs that would lead to countless tragic trials and executions across Europe, a dark chapter in human history fueled, in part, by misunderstood pharmacology and deeply entrenched fears. Opium and the monk's secret stash, the softer side of substance use in a hard world. Now, not everything was a one-way ticket to Nightmareville, or a public accusation of devilry leading to a rather unpleasant execution. There was a more gentle escape, if you will, the kind of high that didn't involve conversations with imaginary badgers or questionable anointing, but rather a quiet, almost sacred reprieve from pain and the relentless weight of existence. I'm talking about opium. Yes, the same stuff that got many a Victorian poet into trouble, inspiring epic poems and tragic lives, and still causes significant issues today. But in medieval times, before the mass industrialization of pharmaceuticals, opium was widely known as poppy juice, or tears of the poppy. It was cultivated and harvested, especially in the Near East and parts of Asia, but its medicinal properties were well understood and utilized across Europe, reaching even the furthest corners of our continent, including the monasteries of Romania, where monks often served as the primary healers. It was prized for its pain-relieving properties, its ability to induce profound sleep, and, naturally, its capacity to make you feel rather floaty, blissful, and utterly detached from the harsh realities of your existence. You've got a toothache so bad you're convinced a demon is nesting in your molar, gnawing away at your sanity with tiny ethereal chisels, making you wish for the sweet release of death itself. Or perhaps you're a monk, tired of endless chanting, rigid monastic discipline, the gnawing cold of the cloister in winter, and bland gruel that tastes suspiciously like boiled leather and existential despair, your spiritual journey punctuated by constant physical discomfort. You've heard whispers of the sleepy plant from travelling merchants who pass through your monastery gates, or from fellow monks who've seen service in more exotic lands during the Crusades, bringing back strange knowledge of Eastern remedies. A small dose of opium, often in the form of laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, a preparation often attributed to Paracelsus much later, but simpler water infusions of poppy heads and sap were certainly common, perhaps even dried and smoked in pipes. And suddenly the monotonous chanting of matins or vespers sounds like a heavenly choir, each note a balm to your weary soul, swelling with an unexpected beauty. The bland gruel tastes like manna from heaven, or at least something tolerable and perhaps even mildly delicious, a feast for the senses in your altered state. And that pesky demon in your tooth decides to take a much-needed vacation to the land of blissful oblivion, leaving you in a state of serene calm, a peace you haven't known in years. Opium was widely accepted in medieval medicine, a valuable component of the limited pharmacopoeia available. It was a precious commodity, often reserved for those who could afford it, or those whose suffering was deemed most dire, like dying lords or wounded knights returning from battle, or even used in crude surgical procedures to dull the agony. It was found in monasteries, aristocratic households, and apothecaries alike, passed down through texts and oral tradition. It was used for everything from treating insomnia and calming agitated patients to alleviating the agonizing pain of childbirth, battle wounds, or terminal illnesses like the plague, offering a rare moment of peace in a world where pain was an inescapable constant. But let's be real, a weary monk after a particularly trying day, perhaps having spent hours illuminating manuscripts by candlelight until his eyes ached, enduring a particularly lengthy sermon from a droning abbot, or simply grappling with the profound loneliness and spiritual anxieties of his vows, might have found more than just pain relief in its milky embrace. It offered a profound sense of peace, a quiet detachment from the relentless harshness and spiritual anxieties of medieval life, and a serene, dreamlike state, often accompanied by vivid, pleasant dreams. It was a truly rare commodity, a reliable escape from suffering, in an age defined by hardship, disease, and constant struggle. It offered not a chaotic trip, but a serene, if fleeting, escape, albeit with all the risks of addiction, dependency, and accidental overdose that come with opiates, risks they couldn't possibly understand with their limited medical knowledge. Medieval people may not have understood the pharmacology, the complex chemical interactions within the brain, or the long-term effects of addiction, but they certainly understood the escape, the blessed relief it provided, and for many, that was all that mattered. The pursuit of even a temporary peace in a world so often devoid of it was a powerful motivator, a testament to the human spirit's yearning for solace in the face of insurmountable suffering. It provided a glimpse of heaven, or at least a temporary reprieve from hell. Accidental trips, the terrors of ergot and the dancing plague. But not all medieval highs were intentional, sought out in dark apothecaries or quiet monasteries. Sometimes the trip came to you, whether you wanted it or not, creeping insidiously into your very sustenance, a silent, fungal assassin waiting in your daily bread. And often it came with agonizing pain, grotesque disfigurement, and mass hysteria that swept through entire communities, turning festive gatherings into scenes of collective, horrifying madness. I'm talking about ergot. Imagine this. You're just trying to eat your daily rye bread, the coarse, dark staple of your meagre diet, perhaps the only thing standing between you and starvation. It's often gritty from the rudimentary grinding stone, sometimes even mixed with undesirable plant matter, and it's likely your main source of calories, providing the raw fuel for your endless days of toil in the fields. But unbeknownst to you, the rye grain from which your bread was baked is infected with a parasitic fungus, Claviceps purpurea, commonly known as ergot. This insidious fungus, a purplish-black growth that resembles a rat's dropping or a miniature raven's claw, thrives in damp, cool conditions, often appearing after a wet harvest season, when grain is improperly dried or stored in dark, damp granaries. It's a natural source of potent psychoactive alkaloids, including lysergic acid derivatives, the chemical precursors to LSD, long before anyone even conceived of synthetic psychedelics. You eat the bread, perhaps feeling a strange tingling in your mouth, a subtle unease, a slight metallic aftertaste, or a burning sensation. Then slowly, terrifyingly, your limbs start twitching uncontrollably. Then your neighbour's limbs start twitching. Soon, the entire village is dancing, not with joy or revelry, but with agonizing spasms, screaming in terror, foaming at the mouth, writhing on the ground, consumed by an invisible force that compels them to move relentlessly. They're convinced they're being pursued by invisible demons, or that a searing internal fire is consuming their very souls, burning them from the inside out, turning their blood to molten lead. This wasn't a party, folks. This was St. Anthony's fire, or ergotism, a nightmare made real by a microscopic adversary. The symptoms were horrific and multifaceted, often leading to gruesome outcomes that medieval doctors could only attribute to divine punishment or demonic possession. The alkaloids in ergot cause severe vasoconstriction, meaning your blood vessels narrow dramatically, cutting off blood supply to the extremities. This leads to excruciating burning pain in the limbs, a sensation of fire coursing through your veins, as if hot coals were laid on your skin, followed by numbness, tingling, and eventually dry gangrene, where the affected limbs turn black, shrivel, and literally fall off, often without any other external injury. Imagine the sheer horror of waking to find your fingers or toes simply detached from your body, lying next to you, a chilling testament to the unseen poison within, leaving you disfigured and dependent on others for survival. Simultaneously, the psychoactive properties induce intense seizures, violent convulsions, profound delirium, extreme paranoia, and vivid, often terrifying hallucinations. People would tear at their own flesh, shriek in terror, babble incoherently, and be consumed by mass hysteria that would spread like wildfire through a community that lacked any understanding of germ theory or toxicology. Entire villages could succumb to this agonizing collective madness, with few surviving unscathed. The infamous dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg, France, is one of the most chilling and well-documented examples of this devastating affliction. It began with a single woman named Frau Trophea, who simply began to dance uncontrollably in the street, for no apparent reason other than an irresistible, agonizing compulsion that seized her body. Within days, dozens joined her. Within weeks, hundreds were caught in this horrifying epidemic of movement, a macabre ballet of involuntary spasms. They danced themselves to exhaustion, collapse, and even death from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer physical collapse, all under the scorching summer sun, their feet bloody and torn, their bodies racked with unbearable cramps. The local authorities, utterly bewildered by this inexplicable phenomenon, and believing it was a hot blood disease that needed to be expelled through physical exertion, actually encouraged the dancing. They set up stages, provided food, and even hired musicians to keep the afflicted moving, mistakenly thinking it would cure the affliction. Imagine that. Your city's official response to a mass psychological and physical breakdown is to provide a sound system for a forced, agonizing rave that's literally killing people in front of your eyes. It sounds utterly absurd to us, a scene plucked from a dark comedy, but for them it was a very real, very terrifying event, a collective madness that consumed an entire community, turning a city into a living theatre of human suffering and death. It is widely believed that this was a mass outbreak of ergotism, a horrifying accidental high that turned an entire city into a living nightmare, where the very bread meant to sustain life brought instead a terrifying, dance-driven death, a grim reminder of how precarious life was when nature's subtle poisons were misunderstood. So, next time you complain about your gluten intolerance, or even a bad batch of artisanal rye bread from the local market, remember, at least your bread isn't trying to make you dance yourself into an early grave while seeing shadowy figures whispering terrible secrets from the corners of your mind, a fate far worse than any modern food poisoning or allergic reaction. The medieval mindset, belief, superstition, and the unseen forces that guided their trips. It's crucial to fully grasp the medieval mindset when considering these highs. This was a world utterly steeped in superstition, deep religious belief, and a profound lack of scientific understanding regarding the natural world and human physiology. The universe was not a predictable machine operating on discoverable laws. It was a vast, mysterious tapestry woven with divine will, demonic influence, and the subtle, often malevolent energies of the cosmos. Every unexplained event, every illness, every strange sensation was attributed to supernatural forces. When someone experienced a powerful hallucination, they didn't think, "Oh, perhaps I've ingested a psychoactive alkaloid that's messing with my neurotransmitters and causing a temporary disruption in my perception." No, that kind of logical scientific thinking was centuries away, confined to the distant whispers of future enlightenment. Instead, they interpreted these experiences through the immediate, visceral lens of their worldview, a worldview where magic was real, miracles were commonplace, and the devil was a very tangible, active presence in daily life, constantly seeking to ensnare human souls. If you soared through the night on a flying ointment, it wasn't a hallucination. It was a genuine out-of-body experience, a spiritual journey, and a terrifying confirmation that you had indeed communed with dark forces, perhaps even flown to a witch's sabbath in a secluded forest clearing, where unholy rituals took place under the watchful eye of the devil himself. The sensory experience was so compelling, so visceral, that it confirmed existing beliefs, cementing them deeper into the psyche and solidifying the narratives of witchcraft and demonic pacts. If you saw monstrous beasts after ingesting belladonna, they were not mere figments of your imagination. They were real demons actively trying to snatch your soul, whispering temptations or threats into your ear, urging you towards damnation or dragging you into the pits of hell. This belief system undoubtedly amplified the psychological impact of these substances, making the trip far more profound, terrifying, and existentially significant than a modern person might experience, even with the exact same compounds. The very air, the very shadows, the very rustling of leaves in the wind were alive with spirits, both good and evil, and a trip on a medieval hallucinogen simply ripped the veil away, exposing a reality they already believed existed, making it terrifyingly manifest and undeniable. There was no scientific explanation to ground them, no rational framework to dismiss the visions as mere chemical reactions, no concept of brain chemistry. Every altered perception was a sign, a message, a divine revelation, a demonic torment, or a confrontation with the divine or the demonic, a struggle for one's eternal fate. This added a layer of profound psychological weight to every experience, turning what might be a fleeting discomfort today into a terrifying battle for one's immortal soul, often played out in the horrifying privacy of their own minds, but with very public and often fatal consequences. The Church actively combated such deviations, seeking to explain them through theology or eradicate them through brutal suppression. This inherent framework of belief meant that for medieval people, the high wasn't just a physical or mental alteration, but a direct encounter with the forces of good and evil that shaped their entire cosmos. Conclusion: a farewell to medieval mind-benders and a reflection on modern comforts. So, there you have it, noble listeners. a deep dive into the fascinating, frightening, and often grim world of getting high in medieval times. It wasn't exactly a chill evening with your buddies, a bag of chips, and some questionable streaming content. It was a terrifying, unpredictable, and often dangerous gamble with your sanity, your physical well-being, and potentially your immortal soul. From running naked through fields convinced you're a badger on a divine mission, to dancing uncontrollably until your feet bled from a rogue fungus consuming your very flesh, to having a surprisingly chill time thanks to a monk's secret stash of poppy juice. The medieval experience of altered states was wild, messy, and utterly fascinating. It speaks volumes about humanity's enduring desire for altered consciousness, even when the means to achieve it were perilous, misunderstood, and laden with the risk of eternal damnation. It makes you appreciate modern pharmacology, doesn't it? Or at least the fact that your biggest concern after a bad trip is usually just an empty fridge, a mild existential crisis, and the lingering regret of that awful karaoke performance from last night. Our medieval ancestors didn't have the luxury of calling an Uber to escape a terrifying hallucination, or ordering a pizza when the munchies hit, or seeking professional help for their psychological distress. They just had to ride it out, often alone, often in a world that already felt like a perpetual bad trip, even without the hallucinogenic bread or the demonic visions induced by belladonna. They simply endured, and perhaps occasionally glimpsed another, stranger reality that confirmed their deepest fears or most fervent hopes, and then they woke up to the same hard life, perhaps a little more scarred, a little more pious, or a little more insane. Their attempts to alter their consciousness reveal not only a universal human drive, but also the immense gap in understanding between their world and ours. What do you guys think? If you lived in the Middle Ages facing the grim realities of daily life, the constant threat of plague, famine, and arbitrary feudal lords, would you have dared to try any of these medieval mind-benders? Perhaps for a nagging toothache, for a divine vision to guide your path, or just for a moment's blessed escape from the sheer grind and drudgery of daily life? Let me know in the comments below. Have you heard any other bizarre medieval remedies or fascinating tales of altered states from this dark and curious period? Share them, and if you enjoyed this hour-plus journey into the bizarre and often gross history of getting high, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your equally disturbed friends, and subscribe for more historical deep dives that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the past. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. May your bread be free of fungi and your dreams be free of dancing demons. And remember, sometimes the best way to get high is just a good, long sleep, preferably one that doesn't involve witches' ointments or spontaneous, deadly choreography.